here with the NoGiBJJGear.com Technique of the Month. Of course, as always, I'm wearing all gear from NoGiBJJGear.com. Don't forget to use the promo code CALEB, C-A-L-E-B, to get an extra discount on top of all of their other promos and sale prices. The move that we're going to work on this week is going to be a very simple Kimura finish, but it's a little bit of a twist that actually works really well for me, and I feel like gives me better control in a lot of cases over opponents that have good scramble ability. So there's a million ways, of course, you get into a Kimura grip. So we're going to start with a very basic one where my opponent is bottom side control. And a lot of the time, of course, she's going to be looking for a underhook on me to try to set up her escape. That's one way that I do like to get Kimura grips. That's a classic that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but certainly not the only one. So if she's trying to underhook me and trying to use that for her escape, I can get a bite on my opponent's elbow with my right elbow, which allows me to start sliding, find her wrist, and start to collect my hands. But the nice thing here, because she's digging her underhook in deep, is it's going to be more difficult for her to grab her waistband, lock her hands together, hook the inside of her thigh, whatever she might want to do when she knows that I'm going for the Kimura. So when I get to that point here and I lock my hand, a lot of the time if I'm quick, I can get her hand past her body. Even on a really strong opponent, she needs to find something to hook. Her waistband, her other hand, the inside of her leg, what have you. So if I can get this hand past her hip before that happens and pin it to the mat, that becomes much more difficult for her to do. I'm typically starting with the C with my hand to be able to block her wrist. Once I get it pinned to the mat, I will usually roll that thumb over the top into the 5-finger grip. Now, of course, the classic finish from here would be to roll her up under her side and use that to be able to create the angle to pivot her arm. But I'm a big fan, when I've got my elbow against her hip and her hand pinned to the mat, of staying in this position. Now, when I was first going for the control, I was dropping to my right hip, the one that's closest to her head. Usually, when I'm going for the finish, I'm going to switch that, where I'm going to now drop my left hip back and bring my right leg up. At the same time, as I switch, I'm going to let go of her arm for a moment so you guys can see what's happening. As I'm doing that, I'm creating a little bit of space to pick her shoulder up. As that happens, I'm going to pivot my hand around her wrist. Now this is where things get a little funky because we frequently focus on trying to keep her hand away from her wrist. Her hand away from her waist. But when I get to this point here, as long as I don't allow her to come in front of her body, I'm not worried about her hand approaching it. As long as I keep it here, that's where I wanted it to go anyway. I wanted it to go behind her back. So I'm going to try to do this very loose so you guys can kind of see what the position that we're playing with is. As I switch my hips, all I'm doing is bringing my elbow up on top of her body, and I'm basically using her hand and her elbow as a pivot point. As her body rocks that direction, you start to see her shoulder come up off of the mat just a little bit. Basically, you'll usually get the tap as the hand starts to approach the shoulder. If she's really being stubborn and really fighting, as the hand basically goes below the shoulder, is where you're going to get past the point of no return. If the hand passes the shoulder, gravity is going to take her the rest of the way down, and it's going to be very difficult for her to tap before she gets injured. So as I said, most of the time, as the hand approaches is where you'll get the tap. But the consequences for not tapping if you're using this in competition are pretty high, so you're usually going to get a pretty enthusiastic tap. So as I get to this point here, again, all I'm doing is rolling my hand around to the far side, so my forearm is braced behind the direction I'm trying to drive my opponent's arm. I put a little bit of pressure, pick her shoulder up that little bit, and simply roll. And again, be very gentle with this one. I'm just starting to approach her hand to her shoulder right now. If I continue that motion here, there's not a lot that can stop her from getting injured, which is why they're going to tap before it gets to that point. But if they're stubborn, the consequences are pretty high. It's a little bit different because this is a gravity-driven submission. It's a little bit different from when we're up here where it's purely rotation, where there's never a point where you fall into the submission. Because gravity drives this one as opposed to pure rotation, if she fights it too long, gravity takes over, and that's where there's kind of a point of no return. So be aware of that. The consequences and the damage that can be done are just a little bit higher. If my teammate helps me out, I'm going to do this one more time from a 90-degree rotation so you guys can see what my hips are doing as opposed to what my hands are doing. So we're going to do the exact same thing where we were. When I finish, I'm positioned this way. But when I'm first going for the lock, and she's trying to underhook me, trying to finish the escape, maybe I was in a classic 2 knees, whatever the position might be. But once I decide that I want to go for the Kimura, I'm going to drop my top hip, the one that's next to the head. In this case, is my right. That allows me to get a bite with my right hand. Slide my left hand back until I find her wrist. Connect, float, put my elbow on the floor. Once I get to this point, her hand is kept from being able to approach her body until I'm ready for that to happen. I can roll to my left thumb over the top. Now all I'm doing is bringing my left elbow up, my left hip drops, my left elbow comes up while I keep weight on her hand so it doesn't come in front of her body. Put my elbow over the top, and I simply apply a little bit of a roll. Again, I'm going to do this real gentle, this way. So here, here, here. Just a little bit of space. I'm not letting her sit up entirely. That's where I can start to lose her. I'm just picking up the one shoulder enough that this hand stays beside it. So one more time, let's rotate back to the original position and go through the whole thing. My opponent catches an underhook on me. I switch my hips, get a bite, find my opponent's elbow, then find the wrist, lock my hands, and pin this to the mat. Again, if she brings the hand down before I get the position, then we go to a different finish. But a lot of the time, she is so focused on digging this underhook in deep and high, she's not thinking about bringing that hand down, which is what I can exploit here, where I switch my hips, get my bite, and pin this arm to the mat before she gets to that point. Again, I have a little bit of a weight and size advantage with my teammate right now, but this works really well, if anything, even better against a larger opponent because they are so focused on, I can just hulk out of this position, which is why they aren't worried in a lot of cases about bringing that arm back down. So we're playing here, I get that bite, I find the elbow, I find the wrist, and once we get to here, they're not strong all the way out here, which makes it very easy to pin that arm to the mat as long as I'm aware that I don't want to allow them to bring it back in. Once I get this pinned to the mat, roll this hand underneath, roll my thumb over the top. Now I can switch my hips, bring my elbow up, keep the weight on my opponent's arm as my hand pivots around the other side. Pick the hips up just that little bit. Try to soften your grip if you're trying to take care of your teammate, and roll. Here, here. Again, be careful before you let gravity take over. That's where injuries happen. As always, guys, let me know if you have any questions, comments, observations, anything that you would like to see in future videos. I'm always happy to hear from you guys. Thank you, Sydney, for the help. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for watching.